Hello and welcome to the first episode in this brand new series, Bowyer's Black Book, a joint collaboration between myself, Ben from Blues Breakdown, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Luke from Blues Analytics. Luke, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good. You?
Yeah, all good, all good. How have you been coping in at the end of the football season then? Euros obviously start tomorrow, but missing it?
Yeah, of course. It's always the way, isn't it, when you get to the end of the season? But luckily, we've got the sort of the Euros to come, so there's not much respite from it. We're straight back into it with football every day for the next month. So happy days.
Happy days, yeah, exactly, and some decent weather to go with it. So just before we kind of start on this, how, if you could sum up the season for Blues last year in a sentence, what would you go with?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it was almost split into two segments for us, really. I think overall disappointing, but of course, there was the salvation at the end with Bowyer. So it's hard, really, isn't it, to sort of summarise the season as one because of the way that it was so sort of Jekyll and Hyde, really.
Yeah, I think probably spot on with that, and I think if I had to sum it up in a sentence, it'd be thank goodness for Bowyer.
Yeah, that's it.
So there's been a lot of questions on social media since we posted the teaser out a week or so ago about what exactly is Bowyer's Black Book. So just a quick summary. So there's 3 different episodes that we've put together. Each episode will look at a different area of the pitch, and we'll just run through the current squad options that Blues have available to them and highlight some areas where we think the squad might be short, and then offer up some names of potential incomings who would improve the squad. And we've split those down into 3 different options. So we've each picked a sensible option for each position. So that's a player where they won't break the bank to bring them in. Might be somebody a little bit more obscure from lower leagues. We've then got a preferred option, so somebody maybe with a little bit more championship experience, where Blues might have to pay a little bit of money for them, but still within kind of the price ranges that we think Blues might be able to offer. And then the third option is a former Lee Bowyer player, which obviously, because he's only managed ourselves and Charlton, will be a former Charlton player. So we're starting this episode by looking at the defensive third of the pitch. So we'll be taking a look at the goalkeepers and the defensive back line. So just having a look at the squad, or the players that Bowyer has available to him at the moment, mate. Just kind of talk us through each area on the pitch. So starting with the keepers, how do you see the keeping position at Blues for next season?
I think goalkeeper, is one area where you'd say that we are sort of relatively well stocked. When you look at the ages of the goalkeepers there, you've got the sort of lower end of the spectrum with the young, sort of inexperienced, but by no means ability down there. The lads with potential who could come into the squad either next season or the season after. But you'd look at the mantle of the goalkeeper right now in safe hands with Everidge, really. I can't imagine that he would be displaced between now and the end of his contract.
Yeah, so I think Neil Etheridge, come in last summer, brought in by Karanka, good age, really good experience within the Championship and a bit of Premier League experience. So, first season I think he did a decent job. I think he probably, he had a few errors in a couple of games where he went through a little bit of a bad patch. But I think that happens to all Championship goalkeepers over the course of the season. But I think in general he probably saved us more points than he lost. So his position is probably safe. What would you say to the number 2 position right now? Who's kind of, is that up for grabs, or is somebody really, grabbing hold of that?
I personally think that G-Cut could do a job next season as Everidge's deputy. With Preto, I'd imagine that he may be on, without knowing his wage, he may be on that sort of bracket where he's on a little bit too much to justify him as a number 2, but not enough that you have to sort of thrust him into the team. So I think that G-Cut could easily be the deputy next season. But if Bowyer decides that he needs to go out and earn his stripes and play a sort of another full season somewhere next season, I certainly wouldn't be against that either.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, isn't it? You know, that because we're well stocked in that position at the moment. If you were to leave on loan for a year, go out maybe to a League Two club, and play week in week out, and come back the following season challenging for that number one spot. We've got two keepers in Prieto and Truman who you probably wouldn't want to rely on. But actually, we're not going out and looking for another keeper. If one of them were to leave, say, discounting G-Cop, putting him to one side, but if one of Prieto and Truman were to leave, do you think then G-Cop might stick around, or do you think then we might be looking to bring someone else in?
I still imagine that it's an area that I can't imagine that we would be looking to bring somebody in. I think it just comes back to any sort of incoming players' expectations, really. I can't imagine that any goalkeeper coming in would expect to be number one with Everidge there. And at the same time, with the sort of financial restraints of COVID and how we may potentially feel the pinch of that beyond this season, for me, it seems like a position that wouldn't necessarily need to be refilled at the moment, even if one of those guys were to leave on a permanent.
So moving slightly further forward and into the right back or potentially right wing back position, currently the only senior right back that we've got, potentially the only out and out right back in the squad that we have is Maxime Collan after the departures of Josh Dacres-Cogley and Romeo Hutton. Mr. Dependable, Mr. Consistent, Maxime Collan. Usual sort of 6.5, 7 out of 10 every week. Is it an area that you think we need to strengthen potentially then with just the one option there?
I think if you're looking at prioritising positions next season, I think the right back for me is right up there. Not in a sense that Colin needs to be changed out of there. I just think that he needs a deputy who can step in as soon as or in the eventuality that he does sort of potentially get injured. We all know that the Championship is a physical league, very demanding. The fact that Colin has done it so often, week in, week out, I know he has had his sceptics at times, but for me, I think he's, as you say, very Mr. Reliable. When Wesley Harding left the club, I thought that there may potentially be somebody coming in straight away. There was times when Josh Dacres-Cogley probably got more of a chance last season than he has previously, but with Valerie coming in, it looked like it was only ever sort of short-term gaps really as Colin's deputy. So I think we need somebody there who can be more of a permanent fixture, someone who could step into the first team if Colin was injured or if he were to leave the club. And at the moment, when you look at that visual, it's the first thing that strikes you really, how sort of lopsided that defence really is in relation to reserves.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of the departures of Cogley and Hutton then? Do you think it was probably the right decision to let them go, knowing actually, that by letting them go we were not weakening that area in the pitch, but we were just removing all any sort of depth that we had there?
Cogley could step in if needed, or as you say, Hutton that was previously here. But are those players going to give you the quality that Colin gives you? Are they players who have been prepared, ready to step in, or is it just a case of we've got right backs at the club, let's play them if Colin isn't there, or have they been chosen for a reason? I particularly think Cogley was brilliant at times last season. He wasn't at the levels that Colin is at, but there were times when he pinged the ball sort of 50, 60 yards. I think there was one game away last season. It may have been the Preston away game prior to us scoring. But he showed a few sort of decent moments. But I think that perhaps with Cogley, I think we know it as fans, and he possibly as a player that the time for him has come to potentially look for a starting spot somewhere else. Hutton, I imagine, will be thinking the same, wants to go somewhere, play football. I can't really begrudge any player that wants to go and sort of play first team football, really. I think looking back now, the decision to lose Harding, probably on reflection, it possibly the best idea with how he fared in the Rotherham team. But again, it comes back. I imagine the player was knocking on Karanka's door saying that he wanted to play, and Wesley Harding seems like the sort of player that he's been here for some time, and if he's not going to get the games, I imagine it's just a case of him looking elsewhere, wanting to further his own career. And he's playing for the Jamaican national side now, and he's done well at Rotherham, so he'll feel that the decision has been vindicated. But of course, it leaves us with a Harding-shaped hole in the right back position, really.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, mate. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think actually had Harding maybe been a year or two younger, we may have been able to keep hold of him for a little bit longer, and he would have kind of transitioned into that Colin role in the next sort of 18 months or so. But at the age that he was, 23, 24, and similar with Cogley, I think it's 25. The time is that they need to be moving on and playing first team football regularly. And as you say, you can't begrudge any player wanting to do that. So yeah, certainly an area I think right back that we need to add some depth to. At the very least, and somebody who can step into that role. Nico Gordon's done it a little bit for the 23s, but is he ready to step up permanently into that role in the next year or two as Colin begins to age a little bit? Would we feel comfortable him filling in there? Given as well, and we'll move on to it now, the situation with the centre backs that we've got. So currently with 3, you would say, senior centre-backs in Mark Roberts, Harley Dean and George Friend. Obviously, we've seen Christian Pedersen play there a little bit towards the back end of the season on the left side of a 3, but we know that he's naturally more of a full-back. And then you've got the 2 younger players in the squad there, in Mitchell Robertson and Nico Gordon. So, thoughts on current centre-back options, mate?
I think the main thing that strikes me is the lack of left-footed options. I know George Friend is left-footed. Pedersen has slotted in there as well with his left foot. But for me personally, I know that there are many great centre-half partnerships, both right-footed. But for me personally, I like a right footer on the right and a left footer on the left. I think it's probably only the form of Roberts in the second half of last season that that may potentially still be our first choice partnership going into next season. And I think that's probably a testament to the form of both players, both in with a shout of player of the season last season, all this season just gone. So again, I think that if we don't recruit an out starter, I think it is just surely down to the testament of how Dean and Roberts have handled the transition to Bowyer and how reliable they've been under Lee Bowyer. But for me, when I look at the ages there, again, it looks like there's no sort of middle ground really. You've either got the old and sort of wise heads, and the Dean isn't quite 30, but the lads who are touching 30 or just above, and then you've got the 2 lads, Roberts and Gordon, who you may assume may potentially be a little bit too early for them to step into the fray of a seniorship season. So I think for me, I'd like to see somebody a little bit older than those 2 lads. Somebody who could easily slot into that back 2 when required, and you've seen it plenty of times when a player does come into a back 2 and with the task of just sort of filling in for one, and then they end up doing well and sticking around in there. So I think I'd like to see a player who can deputise to one of them, and then if it calls for, then they can sort of slot in and play as well. I think Clark sort of fits that role quite sort of perfectly. Really, he can play football. He's got a left foot. Well, they've all got left feet, but he's particularly left-footed. Although sometimes we play a lot with one leg. But I was quite pleasantly surprised to see Clark Salter come back, but he didn't get the nod for whatever reason. I think he played left back under Karanka away at Cardiff, and he never seemed to recover from that outing really. But on paper, you'd like to see Clark Salter in the squad, even if it's just for sort of his experience and his leadership. But he's definitely got a good calibre about him, and I was surprised that he didn't get much of a go last season. But somebody in that mould, sort of mid to low 20s, left-footed, can play. That would be my sort of profile for a footballer coming in. But as I say, I'm certainly not adverse to 2 right backs, but I quite would like to see a younger left-footed centre half at the club.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you make there about the ages as well. And interestingly, I think when I was having a look earlier, that once the season starts, I think Harley Dean will have turned 30 by that point. Mark Roberts is pretty close to turning 31. So yeah, you've got then your three senior centre backs, all of 30 plus, and don't get me wrong, that experience that they've got in the last couple of years has probably proved pretty invaluable in the positions that Blues have found themselves in. But we've really got to start looking and planning for the future a little bit more. And as you say, that little bit of balance of maybe getting another left footer in. You look at that graphic and actually you switch Dean over to the other side and bring someone in. You've got two senior left-footed centre-backs, two senior right-footed centre-backs, and then a younger understudy in each position. And you kind of look at that and go, yeah, actually that looks like the basis of a really good centre-back team going forward. So yeah, I'm definitely with you on that one. I think somebody to fill that void, like you say, mid to low 20s, left-footed. Bit better, maybe slightly more confident on the ball than we've seen with Dean and Roberts, but equally still really good in the air. So then finally, mate, just moving on to the final area of the defensive third, so the left-back position, currently filled by Christian Pedersen, and obviously post-season we saw that Steve Seddon, the club had taken up the option on his contract to extend by a further season. What did you make of that?
I think the left back position for me, I think it's in safe hands, to be honest. I like Pedersen. Again, similar to Colin, I've seen sort of times when people haven't, they've been put off by certain attributes with him. I've seen that he's sort of two-footed. It makes too many mistakes, but it's difficult because if we omitted Blues defenders after every mistake they made, then we probably wouldn't have a defence. But for me, Pedersen, I quite like him. I think, particularly the season under Monk, I thought he was brilliant when he was sort of played left of the midfield. But even defensively, he's made his senior debut now with Denmark, and I think it was well deserved. And I think with Pedersen, I personally think that if he stays here, we've got another sort of few years out of him. And I think Seddon is a good understudy. I think that his delivery from the left, I'm struggling to think of the last sort of fullback that we had that had the delivery of Seddon. I know that he's still young and he's not going to get as many games with Pedersen in front of him, but you've got a big Duke in there and you need somebody to deliver a ball. I think if we do opt for that narrow diamond, but we have seen Bowyer preferencing at times last season, I think it's going to be very reliant on fullbacks getting forward. And I know that Pedersen can also do that, but I think that when Seddon gets into that final third, I think his delivery is absolutely spot on pretty much every time. So I think Bowyer's obviously run the rule over him and since that he really likes to have triggered that option there. I imagine he'd be thinking the same to get the ammunition into Dukey, really.
Yeah, I mean, I was personally quite pleased to see that the club had taken the option up on Seddon. He's had a couple of decent loan spells out of the club. We saw the game was at the start of last season against Brentford, where he put in that ridiculous ball and the ridiculous header from Pedersen to score outside the area, and we've seen it a couple of times on his return to the team when Bowyer's come in. Really pleased with that. And I think the two of them offer something a little bit different to each other, as you say. If we want to play, a flat back four, more of a flat back four. In the 4-4-2 potentially, Pedersen's a really great option there. If we do opt for a three at the back with wing backs, Seddon and Pedersen offer some different things there as well. And if we do see kind of a transition towards Bowyer's diamond formation, you're right. The reliance is on the full backs to get forward and provide some width and be that creativity out wide. And I think certainly Seddon's delivery could be key to that. He played quite an advanced role at Wimbledon. I think he could do a similar sort of job for us. So pleased with that. I think we've got good options there. You've obviously also then got George Friend potentially that can slide into that left back role as well. So decent cover, I think, on that side. So we've kind of gone through the options that Bowyer has available to him in the defensive third at the moment, and I think we both agreed on probably two key areas in which Blues could potentially look at strengthening, and the first one of those that we identified was the right back role, and I think we touched on it in our discussion there. But ideally with Colin, pushing towards 30 now. And he has been really consistent in that role, but he needs somebody that's able to step into into that role potentially in 18 months to 24 months time. Somebody that's going to really challenge him. I think ideally we'd want someone in a fairly similar style. I don't think, I wouldn't say Colin is brilliant going forward, and I wouldn't say he's brilliant defensively. He's just a really good all-round fullback, and I think trying to find someone in that style, potentially maybe somebody slightly in the slightly more attacking mould, might not be the worst thing if we do go with the diamond and actually there's a bit more emphasis on the fullbacks to get forward and provide some creativity, or in three at the back with the wing backs. But certainly someone in that type of role, kind of around the 24-ish age, 25 age, So what we'll do is we'll run through the options that we've put together. So just to remind everyone, myself and Luke have chosen a sensibly priced option. So somebody maybe that's a little bit cheaper out of contract, maybe somebody from the lower leagues. We've gone for a star option, and that is somebody that's potentially Blues might have to spend a little money to bring in. But they probably add a little bit more quality to the squad. But first off, we've chosen a player that has played under Lee Bowyer before, that he may look at in a similar style to the way that Karanka brought in his own players at the start of last season. So opening Bowyer's Black Book for the first time, and the first player that we're going to look at is a player that's well known to Lee Bowyer, and that's Adam Matthews, the right back who's currently at Charlton. He is out of contract, actually, this summer. I know that Charlton have offered him a new deal, but as of yet he hasn't signed it, so he would be available on a free transfer. Welsh international, came up through the ranks in Cardiff. Remember him going up to Celtic. It was quite a big move up there. A bit of Champions League experience, and then he was signed by, I believe it was David Moyes at Sunderland when they were in the Premier League the year they got relegated. And I think actually he ended up playing for Sunderland in the Premier League, the Championship, and in League One, before moving to Charlton in September 2019, where he joined the newly promoted Charlton team into the Championship. He's got a little bit of versatility. As I say, he's primarily a right back, but can fill in on the right side of a centre back three, I guess. Looking at it though, he has had some injury issues in the past, and he's also a really similar age to Maxine Collins, so he doesn't really fit that profile that we were looking for. But he does offer some versatility. He has got some big game experience, having played some Champions League football, and as I say, he is well known to Lee Bowyer, and it would be a relatively cheap deal for Blues to complete. So just one there to keep, to be mindful of, that he may well look at that. We saw with Aitor Karanka last year that he brought in some players that he knew and some players that he trusted, and we're speculating about what Lee Bowyer might do, but potentially he might go down this sort of route. So just one to keep an eye on. So turning the page onto the first of our picks, and it's Luke's sensible option for his right back. So turning the page over, Luke, who have you gone for?
Well, I think this will be a player that will be a little shock to anybody who's watched much League One football, particularly Sunderland. Even if you've seen the Sunderland documentary, I think you'll be aware of Luke O'Nien, who did come across as quite a strong character in that documentary. But of course, that's not the reason why I want him to Birmingham City. Although I do think somebody should make a documentary at some point.
Absolutely, Amazon if you're watching.
So the first thing that obviously stands out about Luke O'Nien is his versatility. He can play as a centre back or also as a right back, where I've listed him as one of my picks today. Alternatively, again, he could easily sort of deputise as centre back, and he can step into that central midfielder as well. He's a great age at 26, so he's still got his best years ahead of him. The one sort of drawback from his physicality, you look at him being 5'8", with the one of the key defence with Dean and Roberts being that aerial dominance. I don't know if Luke O'Nien would potentially fit that bill. but of course, there is always exceptions you make for the right players, and you can sort of change that style a little bit. And I think you could easily play him at a right back or centre back. He's had some big game experience already. I believe he played against Bowyer's Charlton in their playoff final win. I watched him recently in the playoffs. Sunderland suffered yet another setback, which, of course, their loss will eventually be somebody else's gain, as he is currently out of contract, and I believe he can't be that short of offers from clubs all over the Football League, really, due to his talents. As you can see on the right there, the way that he stands, the line there being the average League One right back, he stands out in quite a few metrics. Not least his accurate passing. So he does like to pass, and he does do it accurately. I think that Blues have got themselves in trouble a little bit in the past, trying to bring the ball out from the back, or even trying to make a simple pass and from that defensive position and then being caught out. So I know that passing isn't a prerequisite of a good defender, but it certainly helps if the lad can sort of play. When you look at his dribbling ability there, it's sort of 2.92 dribbles per game, which is touching on almost sort of double what your average League One right back would embark on in a game. Not always successful. Again, if you look at that further, it could be that he's just trying an ambitious dribble to get his team up the pitch. So he's attempting them, and 51% of them are successful. But his crossing is accurate. He likes to get his crosses off, and they do tend to be accurate. Going back to the ammunition to Big Duke in the middle. Again, we may opt to play wingers, but if we do opt for wingers, it'll predominantly be Bella and Sanchez on their opposite side. So if you have got them cutting inside, then you still need the width really. And a couple of times when I watched Bowyer's Charlton last season, I know that there were a few gripes from Charlton fans towards the end. The style of football was always amazing. But I believe I watched their final game prior to him coming to Blues, and I remember seeing that it was quite a narrow formation, but when Charlton started to overload the box, you had the fullbacks on either side sort of bombing straight on. So I think that when Bowyer gets a full pre-season with the Blues team, I think that he will want his fullbacks doing that, in which case that you would prefer a fullback who can put an accurate cross in. Again, when you look at those metrics of how many crosses he puts in and how accurate they are, they particularly stand out against the other players, his other peers in that league. So I do think that is a good attribute about him.
Yeah, no, it's I've watched a little bit of Sunderland and particularly in those playoff semi-finals. And one of the things I think Lee Bowyer would love about him is his energy. He's one of those players that he's just always running, he's always moving, no matter what the game state, he's always putting in 100%, as you say. In that, he comes across really well in the Sunderland Till I Die documentary as well. Seems like a really good fit within a dressing room. So yeah, there's certain attributes and things that the data can measure, and you can pull out from the metrics, as you've done really well there. But one of the things that you don't get is how do we think the player would fit into the club? And I really think that Luke O'Nien would be one of those players that A, would fit into the dressing room really well, but B, would be the sort of player that Bowyer would love to have, because he's we've seen in the brief period that he's been in charge of Blues that he likes players that give everything, that will run themselves into the ground. And Luke O'Nien is definitely one of those players, like you say. The versatility that he offers as well, it is brilliant. He's not going to be on huge wages because he's currently at a League One club, albeit a League One club that do have a little bit of money. So yeah, I would imagine that he will be, if he doesn't sign this new deal at Sunderland, he could be one that there's a lot of clubs in both the Championship and League One would be looking favourably at.
Absolutely, and I think for me, he fits both profiles of what we've looked at as a centre half and a right back. Really, I mean, he's in that sort of mid-20s range, and I think with Blues, I think that if there isn't going to be a lot of additions this summer, then I think it never hurts to have a bit of versatility there. And I think that a lot of people watching him recently will perhaps see him as more of a centre half. But I remember in 2019. When he was almost forced to play as a right back for Sunderland, he had a string of sort of man of the match performances there, and he was a sort of case where he was just sort of used to being sort of used to plug the gap really, and he ended up sort of getting a string of man of the match performances, and I believe he may have even got the Young Player of the Season award at the end of that season on the back of his versatility. So I think that, as you quite rightly said, he seems like a great character, and I thought that was why it was worth mentioning about the documentary, really, because I knew about him from the documentary before I knew sort of much about him as a player, just for the sheer the way that he comes across on the documentary. He does seem like a fairly sort of decent character.
Yeah, no, would definitely agree with that. So we'll flip over the page and move on to my choice at sensible right back. And I've gone for a player that potentially not many people know about. It's Cambridge United's Kyle Noyle, who's 24 years of age, and he's just come off the back of a promotion-winning season with Cambridge, and he's had a wonderful season personally as well as with the team, and he's made the League Two Player of the Season team as a right back. He's a product of the West Ham Youth Academy, so he's got good pedigree. A lot of good players have come out of West Ham's academy for years now. So yeah, he's got a really good pedigree from there. He's a very, very attacking right back. Loves to dribble with the ball. Again, gets crosses into the box. Does it in volume. Does it with accuracy. Drives the ball forward. I was talking to Ed Walker on Twitter, who's described him as Trent Alexander-Noyle, so the TAA of League Two football this season. He's
high praise.
Yeah, massively. And that kind of gives you a little bit of a flavour of what type of player he is, albeit at a slightly lower level. So yeah, he also is out of contract this summer. Has been offered a new deal by Cambridge, but is yet to sign it. They have obviously moved up now into League One, and I think they would be really keen on keeping somebody that's been excellent for them this season. Interestingly, Cambridge for quite a lot of the season have played a 4-4-2 diamond, similar to how Bowyer's played previously. And he's been instrumental in creating from out wide for them. So I think if that's a route that Lee Bowyer decided to go down, he certainly wouldn't be a stranger to that sort of position and that sort of role that he's been asked to play. Just looking at potential drawbacks, this would if he moved up to Championship level, it would certainly be the highest level that he's ever played. He's only really sort of played lower league football, and it would be a big jump up, and it would be a risk in terms of how would he settle. But I guess that's where you then look at it and say, if there's no fee involved and it's going to be low wages because he's coming from League Two, is that a risk worth taking, that actually after a season or so in Championship football he could become that first choice starter for us. It's also worth just looking on the right hand side there of how he compares to League Two right backs this season. In pretty much all the metrics, he's well above the average. The one that probably stands out there immediately is how he's done defensively, with the majority of those being well below average, apart from actually, and potentially the most important, is the number of defensive duels that he wins per game, which is just above the average. So although he's not involved in a lot, the ones that he is involved with, he is winning. So yeah, an interesting player, one that would be a risk for Blues, but as we said previously, it's in a position and in a role that is playing as a backup. So we wouldn't need him to come in and hit the ground running. He would probably fill that void that was left by Dacres Cogley. Would he have the quality to make that step up? Well, that's difficult to know. But certainly there's a player in there, and I would imagine if he doesn't stay with Cambridge, he would probably quite easily find on a League One team to play with next season. So we'll move on to now our kind of star picks for the right back role. So these are a couple of players that we've picked out that Blues might have to pay a bit of a bigger fee for, but potentially are a step up in quality on the picks that we've chosen as sensible options. So first off, Luke, it's your star pick at right back. Who have you gone for?
Yeah, so I've gone for Louis Coyle, currently a right back at Hull City. Just been promoted from League One into the Championship. possibly would have been easier to put them away from Hull had they not been promoted. But now that they're in the Champion, it may sort of prove to be more of a financial commitment for Blues. Should we go for somebody like Coyle? He started his career at Leeds. I think he spent 6 years there, but he didn't quite make the breakthrough. So he went to Fleetwood in search of first team football. He eventually made something like 117 appearances, I believe it was, for Fleetwood over a couple of spells. Jerry Barton couldn't speak highly enough of him, mainly due to his versatility. Of course, he's an out-and-out right back now. But at Fleetwood, Barton played him at left back. He even played him at central midfield. There's some pretty good quotes from Barton about him, that he's the sort of player that you would absolutely love to have at your football club. Even as a right back, he did score Hull's goal of the season this season against his former club, Fleetwood. It was a 30-yard absolute peach of a strike. He did have a very successful second half of the season as well, which saw him getting the PFA League One Team of the Year. And then when you look at the metrics to go with that, he does certainly stand out against the right backs in the league, but particularly in sort of the areas where I would like to see him standing out. When you look at the dribbles, he's touching on 73% successful at dribbling. Again, I mentioned it earlier that Blues have been sort of caught out at times playing out from the back or making a mistake, particularly when we play quite deep and the defensive line is quite deep. It's often reliant on either a sort of lump out of defence, just hit it long. But I'd quite like to see a little bit more guile really when the ball goes out wide. Somebody like Louis Coyle, who is going to dribble out from defence. By no means he's not Messi, but he does certainly stand out in the metrics as somebody who can sort of look after the ball, particularly in the successful defensive actions per 90. So you can see he's a handy defender as well. Tends to win his defense balls, but then when he has the ball in possession, he makes good passes, good accurate passes. To the final third, but sort of progressive passes just to sort of get Hull further up pitch, making those progressive runs. Hull, for anyone who's seen Hull last season, they do like to play their stuff. They obviously they went for Dan Crowley from us. I don't think they could quite fit him into their setup in the end, but it was with the intention of playing football, and they like to keep it on the deck. And Louis Coyle certainly is a decent footballer. 25 years old. He fits that profile really of anyone who signs him. I believe he's got 2 or 3 years left with Hull. But if we're Blues were to pick him up, then we've got in front of us sort of numerous years. The cons, obviously, that because he has got that time left on his contract, we would need to pay a bit of money to prize him away, and he probably would come with wanting the insurance of first team all, due to his importance to that whole side. The fact that he just had a really good season, he's going to want to build on that, and I can't imagine he's going to be the sort of player who's going to want to come to Blues and play second fiddle. But when you look at the metrics as we have done as a sort of concurring theme throughout the players that we've looked at, when you look at him from that point of view, he does stand out really well. And he's a player that I would like to see on the right side of Birmingham City's defence.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that chart on the right hand side there, I mean, it's so well rounded, isn't it? There's so much, green in there in every single area, in the attacking portion, the defensive portion, and the possession portion there, which really demonstrates just how well rounded he is. I mean, it was interesting. He had an interesting season really because he was brought to the club last summer. He is born in Hull. So he's a local lad, and I think he turned up and missed the first part of the season through injury, and really had to fight to get his starting spot back. And then I think from January onwards, he made that right back spot his own, and as you say, played his way into the League One Team of the season, with some really, really fantastic performances. So as you say, it would be, particularly as Hull have been promoted now, it would probably take a decent fee to prize him away from his boyhood club, and he probably would want that assurance of first team football. But
Absolutely, and I think that as you say, because he's so well rounded, Joey Barton being a midfielder himself, I don't think he's going to throw sort of any defender into the centre of his midfield. It's always going to be somebody who can look after the ball, can use it well, can tackle, and defend just as well as he can play the game. And I think that those sort of quote Joey Barton maybe many things, but I think that I'd imagine that he wouldn't have played in there if he didn't believe that he could handle it. And I think that, as you say, he's one of the many jewels in Hall's crown, really.
Yeah, spot on. So, final right back pick, and it's my turn to pick a star option, and I've gone for the second of Hull's right backs. So the man that Louis Coyle replaced in the first team come January, and that's Josh Emmanuel. Who
we might be able to get like a buy one get one free offer if we offer him enough money.
Yeah, do you reckon we could take both of them?
Yeah.
So yeah, Josh Emmanuel made his professional debut as a 17-year-old for Ipswich. Had a couple of loan spells before joining Hull permanently. Good age, still just 23 years old, but does have some championship experience. And he took the opportunity really that he was presented to him with Coyle's injury early season. Talking to a few Hull fans, I think that the plan always was that Emmanuel was coming to the club as probably the second choice, and Coyle was always going to be first choice right back. But that injury kind of messed things around a little bit, and boy did he take his opportunity well. And I think he probably would have felt a little bit aggrieved that he lost that place because he had a storming start to the season. And you can see very similar to Coyle actually in terms of such a well-rounded profile there on the metrics. Again, loves a dribble from out of defence. Shows up really highly in the number of defensive duels that he wins. How he progresses the ball forward both through passing and through progressive runs there. He does have a little bit of championship experience in that Ipswich side that got relegated from the championship a couple of seasons ago. He is a real attacking threat and would probably add a little bit more attacking impetus to our full-back position than potentially Maxime Colin does currently, while still providing some really good defensive cover, because as I say, he does get up and down that flank really well. Again, he is under contract at Hull for another season, so that there would be some kind of fee needed there. What that fee would be is slightly unknown. They signed him as a free, so any money that they were to make on him would be pure profit. But they know, again, having come up into the Championship, they've got an exciting young player there, and they know that he probably would be worth a little bit of money. So it might not be, a small fee that would be needed to prize him away from there. But he could well be one that is looking for first-team football again, so he may well be open to a move, whether or not he gets that at Blues. You'd like to think potentially that Bowyer brings someone in that really does compete with Colin and says, actually, it's open season. You're both here to impress me, and I'll pick the best one. That probably goes in his favour slightly more than Coyle in terms of he is the current second choice at Hull, but we know how quickly things can change in football. So, a really, really exciting player. And again, somebody that, if he doesn't move on from Hull, will be really interesting to monitor next season and see how he gets on in the Championship. So the other position that we picked out that potentially Blues might need to reinforce this summer, when we were talking about it earlier, was the centre-back position, and probably particularly trying to bring in a left-footed centre-back, somebody that is possibly a little bit more capable and confident on the ball than we currently have in Dean and Roberts, but is equally as dominant in the air, because I think that's been a real key feature for Blues over the last couple of seasons. Just how dominant we've been in the air at the back, and then also that kind of then translates into set pieces going forward as well. But I don't think we really want to lose that. But then just adding something different to what we've already got in those centre back options. And again, we also talked about the age profile with our current centre backs all being close to or above 30 years old. So bringing in somebody that's got is a little bit younger, still has a bit of experience, but isn't kind of approaching the peak years in their career. So we've kind of looked at players that would be around sort of the age of 26 or below. So flicking open Bowyer's Black Book once again, and we're the first one that we're going to look at in the centre back position is a player that Bowyer knows well, and it's somebody that he might call upon and bring into the squad, and that's Charlton captain Jason Pearce. So Luke, what do you know about him?
Yeah, so he was very much Bowyer's stalwart at Charlton, the skipper that he trusted, and I believe only Darren Pratley had made more appearances under Lee Bowyer than Jason Pearce. At 6'1", he very much fits that mould of a sort of commanding centre half. He's out of contract this summer, which I believe that may be why Bowyer looks at him. As you and me discussed, he isn't a player that we would sort of run out and sign tomorrow. But if we're looking at players who Bowyer may consider, players that he trusts and players that he may want to bring into the squad, Jason Pearce may potentially be one of those names that he does consider. One of the things that stands out for me, although it's not, it doesn't go hand in hand, but the fact that he's 33, 6'1", you may be excused to think that he's a bit of a lump who may sort of just like to get rid of the ball, similar how we also have seen other centre halves down the Blues of that sort of mould. But you look at the stats that he churns out, and 83% pass accuracy at the back there for Charlton. That was the first thing that stood out for me, really. And he's left-footed, as we discussed earlier. It is something that we do lack in that defence. Quite an accurate left foot at that. And he does tend to win his aerial duels in the same ilk that Dean and Roberts do. But of course, if we're looking at players, left-footed centre halves that are over the 30-year-old mark, we've already got George Friend in the squad. Who's brought in by Crankford under that exact same remit. I would have imagined that somebody that he trusts, somebody that he knows, someone that can be a voice around the squad but can also step in if needed. And of course, the main drawback for Pearce, although he's on a free, would obviously be the age and the absolute lack of resale value there. But with Bowyer currently having quite a limited team around him, he may still opt for a senior figure to come in who he knows and assist him in the on and off the pitch, really, and be his eyes and ears around the place. But Bowyer doesn't strike me as the sort of manager that would necessarily need that. I don't think that he would have not mistrust, but I don't know if he'd have that sense that he would need it, because the players seem to give him everything at the back end of last season, and it doesn't really strike you as the sort of dressing room that you would necessarily need to bring in somebody who you would know, because every single player seemed to react well to Bowyer coming in, and will Bowyer look for somebody who he knows to be at the heart of that defence, or to be around the squad. But I think if he does tend to look for someone like that, then this may be a player that he looks at.
You'll probably have noticed that all the picks that we've gone for so far are all kind of domestic options. They're all from either EFL leagues, Premier League, or the Scottish League, and that's down to a little stat that you posted just after the close season, I think it was, Luke, where, and you might have a little bit more detail, but was it pretty much almost all of the signings that Bowyer's made as a manager have all been from the UK essentially?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I believe that off the top of my head, there may have been one that had left the club abroad, and then they signed for Charlton as a free agent, and the name escapes me off the top of my head. But
is that the guy from Denmark?
It may have potentially been, yeah.
They signed a guy. I think it was in January. I think he was from Denmark, a striker. But yeah, as you say, almost exclusively signing players from the UK, and that might be down to restrictions that he had at Charlton. But just looking at what he's done historically and kind of what we think he might do. That's kind of the route that we've taken with this. So there's plenty of options that he could pick from out on the continent. Although the new work permit rules make it a little bit more difficult scouting in those traditional gem leagues, as you want to call them, like the Bundesliga 2 and the Spanish second division. There's that factor to consider also. Okay, so moving into the first of our picks, and I'm up first with a sensible option as a centre-back, and I've gone north of the border this time. We're into the Scottish Premier League, and we're up to St Johnstone for Jamie McCart, a 23-year-old left-footed centre-back who this season won the domestic cup double with St Johnstone. Signed, I think he came in partway through the season, not last year, but the year before. So he's got another year left on his deal up there. But with the way that there's not a huge amount of money up in Scottish football, particularly outside of Rangers and Celtic. So I don't think it would take a great fee to prize him away from St Johnstone. And he had a really good spell actually with Inverness before that point. Was a graduate actually of Celtic's youth academy, but only made a single appearance for the senior team. So just having a quick look at some of his metrics there, he's probably not quite as tall as our current centre backs, at just 6'1", but at 6'1", but really really impressive in the air, dominant in the air, both in terms of winning duels and the amount that he's involved in. And then again on the ground, in terms of the number of defensive duels that he wins there is really really high. But I think what I like about him, so he fits the bill from the point of view that he's aerially dominant. But we said that we wanted somebody that had a little bit more about them on the ball, and just looking at the number of passes that he makes for a centre back, the number of forward passes that he's making, the number of passes into the final third, and also how he's progressing the ball forward is all just excellent for that particular level. Downside to that is then you look at the accuracy of those, and that is well below the average up in Scotland for a centre back. But the fact that he's trying to push the team forward and that's the way that he wants to play is really really encouraging. He's still at a really good age as well, at just 23. Interestingly as well that St Johnstone this season have played quite a bit with a back three, so he's played on the left side of that back three. So if that's a route that Bowyer wanted to go down, he's got experience playing in that back three, which we talked about Pedersen not having that earlier on, and that being quite key. So that would be a big tick there. But he's also comfortable playing in a flat back four as well. So a player that I think it would be really promising. The only downside is that one of his centre back partners, Jason Kerr, is being he's being linked with a couple of clubs and potentially could be leaving. So McCart then becomes even more important to St Johnstone. And you look at the record of signings from Scotland and how that's gone in recently, particularly with Blues, and go, can they cut it in the Championship? Will they make it? What I would say is I think it's probably slightly easier for a defender to come down and be successful. I look at Scott McKenna, who came from Aberdeen down to Notts Forest, and he settled in brilliantly. And actually with it, I think although there would be a fee needed, the resale value of young left-footed centre-backs at the moment is massive. So I think it would be one that would be worth investing in for the future. Flicking over the page, and it's on to Luke's sensible pick at centre-back. And Luke, who have you gone for, mate?
I think this would be a very sensible pick indeed. It's Matt Clark, currently at Brighton, but he spent the last 2 seasons on loan at Derby. Don't know what he's quite done to deserve that, but as if I can say. His first spell was a bit more fruitful. I believe that 10th in the first season that he was there. He went back to Derby. I imagine that he may have been expecting a similar season. Maybe they were going to make a 4 playoffs potentially, but he's done a second season at Derby for whatever reason, and of course that sort of transpired into a relegation battle. I don't think it was particularly down to the quality or lack of Matt Clark, because I think he's a great left-sided centre half. it's a weird sentence to say in 2021, but I don't think Brighton would have signed him if he wasn't half decent. Again, that's probably a sign of the times that I'm able to say that sentence. But yeah, he won obviously Derby's Player of the Season award in 19 to 20 when he was there. I believe he won. I think it was the third season in a row that he'd won a Player of the Season award. He was at Pompey in the season before that, where he and his centre back partner, the name escapes me off the top of my head, but he conceded 40 goals in 46 games, which is pretty decent at any level, really. As they won the Checker Trade Trophy. And then you sort of, even when that alone, the sheer amount of Player of the Season awards that he's won and how he's been recognised, is probably enough to suggest that he's a good calibre and he's a good honest player. But then when you transfer that into the metrics and have a look at how they look, I mean, against the sort of average Championship centre backs, he's quite clear in pretty much every metric, really.
And that's in a poor Derby team as well.
Exactly, mate. Yeah, that is, and he's 6'1", a great age. I mean, I think any Championship club who needs a centre half, particularly on the left side, because they are slightly at more of a premium, I'd be surprised. How can you look past this guy really when he's sort of churning out those sort of stats and metrics? As you're saying, at a Derby team that was sort of struggling right to the end. He's winning plenty of aerial duels, which necessarily go hand in hand with his height. You still need to get up there and win them. But passing accuracy as well, 84%. Looking at, as you say quite rightly, it's a bit cliche, but in a team as poor as Derby were last season, I can imagine that there wasn't a great deal of confidence in that team, particularly in the back line. Teams were probably, trying their luck with Derby and trying to get at them, because they would have known that their nerves would have been down. So I think that when I've seen Blues teams down in the mire previously, we are a bit of a kick and hope team. We do sort of tend to panic, get rid of the ball, particularly with no fans in the ground. You haven't got that. You haven't got that backing from your fans, so I think it can be a little bit nervy when you are down there. And I think that any defender in that situation could be excused for having quite poor distribution. But I think it says quite a lot about the player that he's still churning out figures like 84% pass accuracy, again in a team that will lack confidence. So yeah, the fact that he will be highly courted is possibly also a negative as well. I imagine that Derby were trying to be getting back. Whether he fancies a third stint at Derby, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of teams in the Championship are looking at him, really. It may not be a case of Brighton trying to cash in at this stage, but they may want him to have another loan move. I mean, looking at the table, would Brighton deem another loan move to Birmingham City a step up for his progress? Would they want him to go to a potentially team who may be challenging at the top end? I'm not sure if he's ready for the Premier League just yet. But again, who am I to say that with any confidence, really, when he's got 3 Player of the Season awards in a row? So he's obviously doing something right, and it could be the challenge that he needs next to play at a slightly higher level. But I'd be surprised if we don't see him back at the higher end of the Championship next season, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you there, mate. And I think he's definitely destined for another Championship move, whether that is another loan move or whether, as you say, Brighton look to cash in. I mean, they've signed, they've got quite a collection of centre backs at the club at the moment. And you kind of look, he's 24. Is he going to get a look in their first team in the next year or two? And they've been very smart by buying up young centre backs, loaning them out for a few seasons, just raising their value a little bit, and they can sell them on now for a decent profit. So yeah, I'd absolutely expect him to be back probably in the Championship next season, whether or not, as you say, it's a loan move somewhere for a third time, or whether or not it's a more permanent move. So we move into the final phase now with 2 picks from both of us, or a pick each, I should say. And this time we're looking at star picks at centre back, and the first one that I've gone for is Millwall giant Jake Cooper, big 6'6" central defender, out of Reading's academy, and interesting really that a number of good centre backs have come out of and players in general have come out of Reading's academy, but they have produced some good players of recent times. And Jake Cooper went to Millwall initially on loan before moving there permanently, and he's been a first team regular ever since. In fact, in the 2018-19 and the 2019-20 season, he didn't miss a single minute of football for 2 consecutive seasons, which is really incredible. He is under contract for another couple of years, and he has got bags of Championship experience now, so he would certainly be one that would be commanding a decent fee. And I think there was a time not so long ago that there was some Premier League clubs probably looking at him, and certainly you'd think some of the teams in the upper echelons of the Championship might be having a look, although Millwall over the last couple of seasons have been up there themselves. Wins, as you would expect, good amounts of aerial duels. But despite his size, he's quite tidy on the ball as well, actually. Probably hasn't scored as many goals as you'd expect. I think he managed 1 this season and a couple the previous season. I think his highest tally is about 4 or 5. But you just wonder if you got some decent delivery into him from set pieces, from someone like Seddon or Sanchez on the corners and free kicks, or Bella. He'd certainly be a threat up there, and would add some even more height to that already pretty colossal back line that we've got. I guess, as I said previously, looking at, he would command a bit of a sizable fee, and actually would he see it as a sideways move to a club like Birmingham at the moment? Millwall have done pretty well over the last couple of years, and that they're an established club within the Championship, so I don't think it'd be a case of going along and just plucking him out of there. He's a massive player for Gary Rowett and that Millwall side, so
quite literally.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, given his size. I think he'd be a really good pickup for Blues, but I think he would probably opt for a move either to a higher club in the Championship, or potentially stay put at Millwall and see what happens. So flicking the page over for the final time in this first episode, and it's Luke's star pick at centre back. Mate, who have you gone for?
I've gone for big Rob Atkinson at Oxford. Great player. This is probably one of my favourite picks out of all the sort of defensive departments, really. Even sort of looking at the very basics, the fact that he's only 22, 6'4", so he's an absolute giant of a bloke. Just sort of recently played in the League One playoff semi-finals for Oxford. I believe he scored in the semi-final as well. But he already looks like a player who's played sort of years and years. He plays beyond his years, really. Looking at the metrics to go with it, you can see why he made the League One team of the season, really, because he can pass, accurate passing, 80% accuracy. Again, said it earlier, but it's more of a modern thing that we look for players, sort of defenders who can pick a pass. But for me, I think that it is possibly an area where Blues have sort of fallen short over these. But the aerial duels, he's 6'4". You can't imagine that he's gonna lose many of them. He's certainly not his strongest point, but he does win his fair share. And the sort of defensive actions, the defensive duels, he stands out well in all of the defensive metrics, really. He likes to go on his progressive runs. When you look at that in comparison to the average sort of League One centre back, he knows how to handle the ball. And he did have quite sort of big shoes to fill, really, at Oxford when Rob Dickie went to QPR. When Oxford first signed him, they loaned him straight back out to Eastleigh as part of the deal when they signed him. But then I believe John Massinio got injured and Rob Dickie was suspended, so that to sort of call him back into the team. And subsequently, Rob Dickie went to QPR, which I also thought was a great bit of business. And he sort of, Atkinson seamlessly slotted him really where Dickie did so well. I believe that there will be a handful of Championship clubs probably looking at him this summer, not least because he did sort of stand out well in that semi-final, but he's done well all season. At the age of 22, in that long old slug of a League One season, and he's made it into that team of the season. I think that sort of says everything about him, really. He likes to carry the ball. He's dominant. He can pick a pass. I'd absolutely love him to see him in the Blues defence for years to come.
Yeah, it's the one that really stood out for me, and having seen a little bit of video of him and a couple of games on TV or whatever, it's just how he carries the ball out of defence. So you look at how we talk about modern day defenders playing out from the back, but I mean he really is one that likes to carry the ball forward, and for a big guy he's pretty mobile. As you say, it'll be interesting because I think there will be a little bit of championship interest. He has made quite a big step up from non-league football into League One. So it'd be really interesting to see if somebody takes a punt on him at this stage, having had such a successful season first time round, or whether or not you've got a number of clubs just monitoring it for another season. It would, you wonder if somebody's just going to be brave and just go in almost like QPR did last year with Rob Dickie, and what a signing that proved to be for them. They've done brilliantly. He's done brilliantly for them this season. So yeah, just wonder if someone will be brave and go in for him now, or whether or not there'll be a number of clubs in for him next season if he has another season like the last one.
Yeah, that's it. And as you say, the step up, he's already made one difficult step up. Whether next another one in the near future will remain to see. But I did see a couple of days ago, I believe Bristol City are looking at him, so they may sort of potentially make a move. But another thing that stood out for me there is the yellow cards per 90, sort of 0.02. And you think when you've got a giant of a centre half, 22, so you could excuse him for the odd rash tackle, or the odd sort of flailing elbow or that sort of thing. But I think that is a testament to his discipline, really, that he hasn't sort of got a high yellow cards per 90 there, and he does sort of seem to read the game quite well.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, not one that I picked out there, but yeah, it's a great spot. For a central defender to be running at that sort of levels, pretty incredible, really. So, again, we've said it with a lot of the picks, but whatever happens with Rob Atkins, it'll be really interesting to follow him over the next couple of years and certainly next season and see where he ends up and how he does. So that brings to a close the picks that we've made for this episode, where we've looked at the defensive third. So we've made a couple of picks at right back and a couple of centre back picks. Please do join the conversation on Twitter. Let us know what you think about the picks that we've made. Suggest some of your own. Let's start a bit of a conversation. Follow, get involved in the conversation on our Twitter channels. Blues_breakdown. Luke, Blues analytics_ is it?
That's right, mate. Yeah.
Cool. Get involved in the conversation. Episode 2 will be coming soon, where we have a look. We move into the midfield third, and we pick out a couple of, again, similar format, where we pick out a couple of options in some key positions there. But thanks very much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it, and episode 2 will be coming soon. So goodbye from me.
Cheers for listening, guys. Thank you. Goodbye.